The way Gladiator 2 wraps up really hints that Gladiator 3 could be on the horizon, and Ridley Scott has already dropped some exciting clues about what might come next. Now, the first Gladiator movie was a solid, self-contained story. It didn't need a sequel, and a lot of people probably would have been fine if it stayed that way. But the theme of legacy was such a huge part of Maximus' journey, that whole idea that what we do in this life echoes in eternity. So in that sense, continuing the story kind of fits thematically. Even though Gladiator 2 only loosely connects to the original at first, it eventually reveals that Lucius Verus is actually Maximus' son, which suddenly makes things more personal. But instead of ending there, the sequel sets the stage for another chapter, something that could tie the trilogy together. So while Gladiator 2 could stand on its own, its ending makes it pretty clear that there's still unfinished business in Ridley Scott's Roman world. At the core of it all is Lucius, who basically becomes the new Maximus, but with a few key differences. He steps up and overthrows the corrupt leadership in Rome, just like Maximus did in spirit. But he doesn't just ride off into the sunset. There's more to be done. The dream of a better Rome, the one Marcus Aurelius talked about, hasn't been fully realized yet. So Gladiator 3 could be the chapter that brings everything full circle. By the end of Gladiator 2, Lucius ends up as Rome's new emperor. And how does he get there? It definitely has shades of the original film. Early on, the story kind of mirrors Maximus's journey. Lucius is captured, sold into slavery, and thrown into the gladiator arena. Much like Maximus, he climbs the ranks, becomes a fan favorite, and fights not just for survival, but for something bigger, justice. But the movie starts to shift gears in the second half, especially once Denzel Washington's character, Macrinus, starts showing his cards. Macrinus, who's been pulling strings behind the scenes, wants to take over and run Rome his way, basically as a tyrant. That's when Gladiator 2 really becomes its own thing, stepping out of Maximus' shadow. And when Lucius finally defeats Macrinus in a brutal final battle, he doesn't just win the fight. He takes back his birthright. He's the true heir to Marcus Aurelius, and now the empire is in his hands. But as satisfying as that ending is, it's not the whole story. Getting on the throne is just the beginning. Now, Lucius has to actually rule, and that's a whole different kind of challenge. There's corruption to clean up, systems to rebuild, and no doubt enemies still lurking in the shadows. So while Gladiator 2 ends on a note of victory, it leaves things open for what happens after the crown is won. If Gladiator 3 does happen, and it's looking pretty likely, it's going to be a very different kind of movie. Both Gladiator and Gladiator 2 were about revenge. Maximus wanted justice for his murdered family. Lucius was out for vengeance after the death of his wife. Those personal losses fueled their quests. But now, Lucius has gotten his revenge. So what comes next? This time around, the story might shift from vengeance to vision. A ruler trying to live up to the ideals his grandfather once dreamed of. And honestly, that could be even more compelling. Building something that lasts is harder than tearing something down, especially in a place like ancient Rome, where everyone seems to be scheming for power. Lucius has a chance to reshape the empire, but there's bound to be resistance. And while it's not the classic revenge arc, Gladiator 3 could still be about payback, just from someone else's point of view. After all, Lucius made plenty of enemies in the last movie, and not everyone's going to forgive or forget. Ridley Scott has already hinted at what he's got in mind for this potential third installment. Even before Gladiator 2 came out, he admitted that he's been working on a script and already has about 8 pages written. He described it as the beginning of a very good footprint, which suggests he's got a clear direction. Interestingly, he said it probably wouldn't focus on the gladiator arena anymore, which makes sense. That story's been told. Now it's time for something else. What's funny is that Scott kind of spoiled Gladiator 2 while promoting it, just by talking about the sequel. He compared Lucius's new role to Michael Corleone in The Godfather, a powerful position he never really wanted. And if that's the model, then Gladiator 3 could go the same route as The Godfather Part 2, exploring how power changes someone. That kind of character arc could give Lucius some serious depth. He's not just the guy with the sword anymore. Now, he's the man in charge, and the decisions he makes will shape the entire empire. that said it might be a while before we see Gladiator 3. Scott's got a bunch of other projects on his plate, including another Alien movie and even a Bee Gees biopic. So even though he's interested, fans may need to be patient. Now let's talk history, or rather, the lack of it. Gladiator 2 isn't exactly trying to be a textbook. In fact, it takes some pretty major liberties with the facts. And if a third movie happens, it sounds like it'll drift even further from historical accuracy. But to be fair, Scott has never claimed his Roman films are strict reenactments. He cares more about the drama, the scale, and the themes, and that means bending history when needed. The first Gladiator already did this by showing Emperor Commodus being killed in the Colosseum, which is not how it happened in real life. Gladiator 2 does something similar. It reimagines Lucius as surviving into adulthood, even though historically he died as a child. Lucilla also lived far longer in the film than she did in real life. But it's all done in service of a bigger narrative. So in this fictional timeline, Lucius grows up far from Rome, only to be dragged back into it as a gladiator. After losing his wife, he sets his sights on revenge. But along the way, he finds out that the man he wants to kill is actually his stepfather. Things spiral from there. Macrinus manipulates Rome's twin emperors, Caracalla and Geta, turning them against each other. And in the chaos, Lucilla is murdered. That's when Lucius steps in, defeats Macrinus, and stops a total power grab. But what really changes everything is Lucius's final speech. After the bloodshed, he manages to get both armies to stand down. He talks about unity, about making Rome better. And it works. That moment, where he asks the soldiers to imagine something greater, is probably the biggest deviation from history. In reality, Rome never became a republic again after this period. The emperors kept rolling in for years afterward. But in Gladiator 2, Lucius seems to plant the seeds for a reborn republic. And that's the big what-if hanging over the potential third film. If Gladiator 3 continues down this path, we might see Lucius staying in Rome, not as a power-hungry emperor, but as someone trying to guide the republic back to life. A passing of the torch from Maximus to Lucius. And if Ridley Scott gets to tell the final chapter, Gladiator 3 might just show us what happens after the sword is sheathed and the crown is claimed. Because ruling Rome, that's a whole different kind of battle.